We made this.
Hello everyone and welcome to Shipwrecked Comatose, a Red Dwarf podcast. My name is Kurt North and with me is Mark Adams. Mark, how are you doing, mate?
All right, dudes, I'm all right. How are you?
And Carl Bryan, how are you?
I'm not too bad, not too bad.
Right, so we're breaking into this transmission because what you're supposed to be hearing right now, as of this moment, is Mark and Carl both speaking about the first American pilot. And we decided that we need to jump into this because things have moved on since the recording of those. And we've recorded... which episode you recorded? The USA pilot, and it was the executive one, wasn't it? And the one that didn't quite get to air. Is that right?
It was the first attempt, which I don't think either of them made it fully to air, but the first attempt was made to be broadcast, and the second one was just for executives.
Right, okay, that's great. So you've both recorded that, Mark, haven't you? So that's all ready to go. We had that ready. Season 1 was finished, which was finished last week, and we were going to display the first of the pilots, and then later on we were going to do the second one. Well, that's right, wasn't it?
Yeah, the idea was basically between each series of the full series of Red Dwarf is just chucking a couple of specials each time, depending on what we fancied covering. So it could have been the books, the Smegazine, the US pilots, the roleplay game, the Smeg Ups, whatever we fancied. But the idea is a couple of special episodes between each series.
Yeah, and I think that we'll be doing that right through the entire run, which will be great as we get to later ones when we're struggling to find stuff. I'm sure we'll be all right. But something happened after your recordings, and that was something I completely forgot about, which was they were doing a documentary series on Red Dwarf for Dave. And that got announced around about 4 or 5 weeks ago, I think. And they said it was coming in August. So we've quickly threw everything that we were planning out the window, and we're looking to look at the 3-part documentary series, The First 3 million Years. And so that's just yesterday, got announced that it's airing on the 6th of August. Now, I haven't had another look, but Matt Laven mentioned something on our little backstage area that is the 3-part documentary series going to be daily, or is it going to be every week? And strangely enough, it's on Thursday, the 6th of August, which is when an episode would be due to air. So have any of you guys seen if it's going to be weekly or daily? Have you seen it, or is still nothing on that?
I've not seen how it's going to get broadcast just yet. No, I believe it's going to be weekly, but I think that might just be something I've made up. But I believe it is
makes
sense.
Yeah, I can't see it being over a weekend of, if it was on the Friday, maybe airing Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I could imagine it. But I think it being on the Thursday, I think they'll probably stretch it out over the 3 weeks. So that'll be certainly interesting. So what we've planned to do is that we're going to give you this episode, which is going to extend it a little bit. Bear in mind, we're going to talk about for 10 minutes here, but we're going to give you the pilot, which yourselves did a few weeks back. Next week, we're going to air the second Red Dwarf USA pilot. And then following on from that, there might be a gap. If there's any news, we'll report that back, and we'll come on air just to quickly talk about any news that happens in between. So that will be around about the end of July, I think. I think it would be it'd be the end of July, won't it? Sort of literally turn into the first week of August. And then the 6th of August will come around. So what my plan is to do is to bring Matt Latham on especially the first episode, and we'll take it from there depending on schedules and stuff like that. And we will cover that documentary series episode by episode, those 3 episodes. But it won't air on the Thursday, bearing in mind it's at 9:00 on the Thursday night. So
that's unfortunate, isn't it?
It is a little bit. So what I plan to do is I'll record it and edit it and get it out as physically soon as we can. As soon as we can record and edit, and then we'll just mention it on the social media when it's out and when we're due to air it and things. And I think we'll take it from there. Then from that, just so people are aware, that what we'll do is after that finishes, which I reckon will be just the second to last week of August, is we'll take a little break and come back late September, early October for season 2. And a bit of backstage information. This is what we're actually coming on here for to record today. So we're going to be recording the first 2 episodes. So you'll be getting that kind of the back end of September, early October. That sound all right to you guys?
Absolutely fine with me.
Works for me.
Excellent. So we'll let you go back to the originally aired episode, and we will see you on the other side. Hopefully you'll enjoy the 3 million years, and we'll speak to you soon.
Welcome to the Starlight Ballroom. Hey!
Hello and welcome to Shipwrecked and Comatose, a Red Dwarf podcast right here on the We Made This podcast network. My name's Mark and I'm one of your regular hosts, but Kurt isn't with us today because this is a special episode. So it's just me and Carl Bryan today. Hello, Carl.
Hello there, Mark. How are you doing today?
I'm doing alright. I'm looking forward to our subject matter today. It's outside of our normal series. We're having a look at the first American pilot.
Controversial topic.
I know, I'd never seen it up until this point. So I've watched it once through, and I've watched it one more time to do my notes, but I'd never seen it before. I had heard of it, and I hadn't heard much good. What's your background with regards to this pilot?
I think very much the same. It's almost basically it's not good, but I think what we might get into is that it's not as bad. A lot of fans make out it's going to be like.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing for me is I went in expecting it to be absolutely unsalvageably wretched, and I don't think that's fair. There is stuff to like in it, but maybe because I was expecting it to be so bad, when it wasn't horrendous, I then gave it more love than it deserves. So I don't really know.
I think it's that thing of, especially during that time period, of when British sitcoms tend to go abroad, the success rate is so low. Especially if they're not using the original cast, or if it's not like a sort of co-production or a continuation of what you've already seen. If it's something that's starting from fresh, like for example, if you ever saw the US pilot of the IT Crowd,
oh dear,
it's not great, but it kind of should have been. It's in a very similar vein in that Richard Ayoade is in it, playing Moss, because who else would you get? But then you've got Joel McHale from Community as Roy.
Right.
And I can't remember who the female lead is now. And you look at it and go, that should work. That should work, and it didn't at all. But it wasn't super offensive. There's just something lost in translation, I think, with a lot of British shows that go over there.
Well, there have been some successes. I mean, I don't like it, but I know that The Office, the American Office, is very popular. And the American version of Queer as Folk, whilst, again, I got the hump when one of the major parts of Queer as Folk was that one of the characters died from a drug overdose the first time he took drugs. That character survived in the American version because Americans are weirdos.
Yeah.
But once I got over that, it had, 60 more episodes than the British Queer as Folk, and just took these characters that were from the British version of the show and just ran with it in an American way. And it wasn't as good, and it did water it down, but it was kind of watchable. So there have been some successes.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you're talking about The Office there, for one thing is, I think with The Office, I think somewhere they had the idea to do something similar, but they thought it would be a good launch pad to take the British one, adapt that for the first bit, or just take bits of it, and then use that as a foundation for their show. Because I've watched a few episodes. I'm not a big fan of Ricky Gervais, to be honest, and I've seen the original Office, and I've watched the American Office, and to me they're completely different. The American one's a lot more, I don't want to say American, but it's a lot more outlandish. And especially with things like the pranks and stuff like that.
And it doesn't feel like a mock docu-series either. It just feels like a standard sitcom setting, if that makes sense.
Yes.
What I don't understand, though, is why do you need an American version of any of these popular American shows? Why can't you just buy the British one and have it that way? I don't understand.
I think they've come around to that idea a lot more in recent years.
Yeah, and have you ever seen the sitcom Episodes?
Yes.
I love Episodes, but that's super meta. It's a sitcom about sitcom writers who go to America with their sitcom, and it gets butchered by the American system. And it kind of feels like that's almost like the sitcom of Red Dwarf to some extent, because they did take over Rob Grant and Doug Naylor to do the writing, and they didn't get any kind of creative control over it. It was taken over and mutilated, basically.
They had a very big fight to try and get something back, as we'll probably go into, and they've talked about it as well, in that when they went over, it was more focused on gags than it was actual plot.
Yeah.
And when they did try and sort of go, well, what are we actually going to do here? The American producers were more like, no, just throw more knob gags at it, it'll be fine. And I think that's something that they've phased out of in America now with their sitcoms, is you need something that's got an arcing story, or at very least like self-contained story, as opposed to just, dick jokes first and then we'll fill in the plot later.
Yeah, and how did you watch this, Carl?
I watched it on YouTube.
Yeah, so did I. And I did notice that it's had 216,000 views. For a pilot that the public weren't supposed to see, I don't think they really care very much that it's on YouTube if 216,000 people have watched it. And it's kind of a running gag, isn't it, that it's the pilot that literally everyone has seen.
Apparently, no one was ever supposed to have a copy. Doug Naylor has said that whenever it's been seen at conventions and stuff, it's been nicked from somebody.
Right.
But you can buy DVDs of it. Not like properly produced ones, but like under the counter. Psst, I've got a copy of the Red Dwarf US pilot. Do you want one? And bizarrely, people have gone, yes.
I mean, this is the thing. There's the Fantastic Four film that no one was ever supposed to see as well, and anybody who's a fan has seen it and gone, oh, in that shite. And I guess that's kind of like the same here, is that fandom has a morbid curiosity for these things, even when everybody says it's cack.
Yeah, it's the Star Wars Christmas special, but for Red Dwarf.
Which I don't want to do a podcast about the Star Wars Christmas special. I like podcasting. I like talking about many, many things. But there is a line, and I think it's the Star Wars Christmas special. Whereas this isn't fundamentally unenjoyable cack like the Star Wars Christmas special. It's alright. It's not great, but it's alright.
If it didn't have the stigma of being transferred from an established British show, which by that point would have been in its 5th series, I think it could have done it. It could have got picked up. I mean, I think if it was done now, it probably could have got picked up just by some channel, but maybe not one of the big ones, but like cable or somebody like that.
Yeah,
with a half decent budget behind it.
You're right, and it was a very established show. We'd already had Mr. Flibble and Dwayne Dibley by this point, 2 very, very iconic moments, which were in Series 5. And this was before what is my favourite series of the entire British run, of the BBC run, of Red Dwarf, which is Series 6. And I just wonder, if this had been successful, would we have ever had Gunmen of the Apocalypse?
Yes, because they'd have wrapped up. Excuse me, they'd have wrapped up Robert Llewellyn. From what the rumours were, they were trying to get Chris Barry. So if that was the case, then no, we wouldn't have had Gunman of the Apocalypse. We wouldn't have had... you never know. It may be... maybe it's a set point in time when it came back on Dave. Maybe then we'd have got Gunman of the Apocalypse. Maybe that one was always meant to be, but no, we wouldn't have got it at the time.
Yeah. Should we get into it then and run through the plot?
Absolutely.
So it starts up with a Star Wars style rolling text, but of course it goes far too fast for you to read. However, sci-fi nerds, not a one of them will accept that, myself included. Would you like me to read out the full text, the notes that I made?
Yes, please. I tried to keep up with it as much as I could, but I'm sure there's a lot I missed out, so I'd love to hear it.
So, the story so far. By the latter half of the 22nd century, huge space cruisers, powered by hydrogen ramjet drives, had colonised the outer fringes of our solar system. Humankind was poised to explore the dark mysteries of deep space. We wish we could have told you stories about these brave men and women, but we couldn't afford it. Instead, what you're getting is this. This is the story of a beat-up old mining ship which ambles between Earth and the moons of Saturn, transporting raw materials which are badly needed by someone. Is it just me, or does this sound really tedious? No one's going to like this. A show about people who move rocks from planet to planet. Intergalactic rock movers? Who are we kidding? I didn't even want to be a writer. Do you realise how hard it is to type this fast? My fingers are bleeding. Uh-oh, looks like we're slowing down. I'd better start making sense again, so all the cheapos who don't have a VCR with freeze frame will think they really missed out on something important. Which you really need to know to understand the story. It's not funny, is it, Carl?
It's not in the slightest, no.
It was kind of obnoxious. And by kind of, I mean really obnoxious. And is that really the way you want to start any show? The first impression that anybody gets is, the writers of this are a bit obnoxious. No one's going to want to watch this. Turns out that people are, but for all the wrong reasons.
I wonder if they wrote it after it had been filmed.
Maybe. That's a good point, actually. So we then head into the theme tune, which is a kind of weird mishmash of the classic credits for Red Dwarf from Series 1 and 2, with an American-style starring at the bottom of the page. But is it me, or when it says Hinton Battle underneath a lady's face? That really irritated me. You watch Buffy, right? You watch the titles to Buffy, and starring Sarah Michelle Gellar, there's a little bit of action of Buffy. Starring Anthony Stewart Head, there's a little bit of Giles looking a bit librarian-y. And then this just didn't fit that at all. It was just random clips and names at the bottom which weren't the character that were on the screen. Am I?
Yeah.
Was that? Is this me just being particularly finicky, or
no?
Not?
It annoys. If you've got a cast as well where you may not know who everybody is, and a name like Hinton Battle, I to be honest, when you see the name Hinton Battle, it could be either sex. It could be a lady, it could be a gentleman.
And, it's a good name, though, isn't it?
It's a fantastic name.
Would you like my one Hinton Battle fact?
Yes, please, yes.
Did you ever watch Buffy the Vampire Slayer?
Yes.
Did you ever see the episode with the Demon of Dance where it was all musicals?
Vaguely remember this.
He's the bad guy. He's the dancing demon.
Excellent. I did look into him a little bit to see what he'd done in it. He's mostly musical theatre. Did you see the little US documentary that came with this? The Danny John Jules talking about Hinton Battle, and he's like undercover hero for young dancers, especially sort of young black dancers. back in the day when he was in the Wiz on Broadway at like 16 years old, and
you could tell that
sort of
Danny Don Jules genuinely admired Hinton Battle as well, which was kind of cool.
He sounded like it took the wind out of his sails a bit when he was like, "Oh, who played me?" And he told him, he was like, "Oh shit, it's somebody good."
What did you think of the theme music?
It felt like it was meandering and it didn't really go anywhere. It didn't really G you up for the show.
Yep.
You know how in the show sometimes it cuts to outside and you get a shot of the model of the ship just to show a passing of time or to show distance being crossed without having to show it. It sounded like the music that would go on one of those bits. It certainly wasn't a theme tune. It was, from what I understand from the end credits, it's Todd Rundgren, who produces a lot of... He's like a legendary producer, produced Bat Out of Hell, produced a lot of sort of that style of music for well over 30 years and is still going now. So when I saw that, I was like, oh, strange, because it's very synthy. And he's primarily done a lot of rock, so I was a bit sort of confused as to... Maybe they could use it as a selling point almost. Maybe in the 90s it was like, oh, it's done by the guy who did Night Court, and the music's by Todd Rundgren.
Yeah.
And
it does feel like the more that you go through this, they got some names, but put them in roles that they were always going to struggle to succeed in. So anyway, it starts with a kind of classic, kind of electronic sci-fi type female voice. A computer welcomed people to Red Dwarf, and there's lots of kind of stock images of the facilities that Red Dwarf has. And the female voice cracks the classic PE teacher's gag from Holly, and then it clicks in that, oh, Holly's a woman from the start in this version of Red Dwarf. And Officer Monson, who's a hologram, is introduced, and he has his own Rimmer gag plus a new one, which wasn't very funny. What did you think of this?
I liked Monson. I don't like the guy who plays Rimmer in this at all. And the more I watched it, because I watched it a couple of times just going through for this, the more I was like, the guy who played Monson should have been Rimmer, because he played it a bit differently. You've got Craig Bierko, who we're going to meet in a minute as Lister. He's like 6'2" and dashing, just ridiculously handsome.
Innie.
You needed someone a bit more weaselly, almost.
Yeah.
And you've got Chris Eigerman, who ends up playing Rimmer. But for me, Munson kind of played it a bit more kiss-arsey in a way. He's trying to be helpful, but he's not.
I think you're right. I think he does come across as Rimmer. It's very Rimmy, for want of a better way of putting it.
And whereas the way Chris Eichmann plays it, he's just nasty. And I know Rimmer can be nasty, but there's a slight sadness to him that almost gives him the upside that you feel for him. There was no moment in this pilot with Rimmer where you kind of go, oh, but he's all right. You know, there's a good side to him. He just seems a dick the whole way through.
And I think that's the problem with the whole pilot itself is, oh my goodness, they try and cram so much in 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And that is clearly something that they sacrifice, the humanity and the deep, deep problems that make Rimmer a very complex, bizarrely likeable character, despite the fact he's a bit of a smeghead. And they didn't have that charm at all. They lost that.
I think if they'd got the guy who played Munson to be Rimmer, just from his face, there was a slight, he didn't do anything that was particularly dickish in this episode. Like when he's telling the sex life joke, which isn't a bad joke. It's not great, but he says it almost with a thing of, because it's part of the Welcome to Red Dwarf video, that thing of, I'm being told to say this joke. And he's kind of got that resigned look on his face. And I think that would have worked much better for this than it would the way they went with it. I mean, when they talk about when Rob Grant and Doug Naylor talked about they tried to get Chris Barry, it's because they said they couldn't find a US actor with a low enough opinion of himself to play someone as weaselly as Rimmer.
Wow. And
which I think they'd got one.
I think that's the problem, isn't it? Is that they already had these iconic characters that had been played to perfection. Red Dwarf, for all its faults in its set and everything, the characters and the actors that play them are exceptional.
Yes. And that's the thing. If they'd done what they did like with The Office, where it's like, we've got these characters, they may have similar names, but let's make them different to appeal a bit more to the US audience. Like I think with a bit of tweaking, I don't think there's a lot wrong with Craig Bierko in this at all. If they'd made Rimmer and Munson almost the same character and made him like a bit of a try hard and a bit annoying, but almost like a sad character.
Yeah.
Rather than a out and out bastard, then I think it would have had a bit more to it.
Yeah,
because you can't replicate Chris Barry. Almost, he's been doing it for at that point 7 years, or I think but at least 5.
Yep.
So he's so intrinsically woven into the character that. It is him, basically, or part of him. And you can't really get that changed round.
No, you're right. And the first character you meet, well, that isn't Holly, is Crichton. He arrives on Red Dwarf, and he is arguing with one of his spare heads because they're lost. And it's Robert Llewellyn playing Crichton, the only cast member from the British show that was brought back to Red Dwarf in the American one. And I don't get it. As iconic as Robert Llewellyn is as Crichton, I feel like they're all iconic.
I think part of it, I think, was they couldn't find anyone who'd wear the makeup.
You really think so?
Part of me does think, like, you know, they may have gone out to people and gone, like, would you sit in the makeup chair for 4 hours a day to put it on and 4 hours a day to take it off? And they couldn't get anybody. Maybe they thought he was, because I think he joked at the time, like, "Oh God, I hope they don't think I am actually sort of Canadian," which was the way he was trying to sound. But maybe they looked at him and went, "Oh, this guy, you know, he is," in the same way that people hire like Doug Jones. You know, if you need prosthetics and you need someone who's going to move well in them, you hire Doug Jones. And back in the day, they must have looked at Robert Llewellyn and gone, we're not going to get anybody better to wear that costume than what he's wearing.
Yeah, and he looks exactly like the British Crichton as well. They haven't done anything to change up the costume whatsoever, which I thought was an interesting choice.
I was looking at that because the quality that we watched wasn't tremendous.
No.
Picture-wise, but I was trying to work out if his suit, if he was wearing, like, the top half was like the regular armour, but then the bottom half was more like trousers.
Right.
It looked a bit weird to me. It looked like he has talked about it, saying that mask was different because he could eat in it. Which it was the same makeup person, so I was interested to see how that was, because it does look a bit more. He's got a bigger forehead on it. I don't know why. The head's a bit different shape. And to me, it looks like the trousers are a bit too. The legs are in trousers, which maybe they tried to make it as comfortable as possible, or maybe time was so. Because, you know, US shows are so like get it done, whap, 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 that they're just like, right, something that he can just buckle on and then pull up his trousers and go.
Yeah, so maybe like a streamlined version of it. But what I'm saying is, he really looked like Crichton.
Oh, he looks exactly the same. Yeah, he's. It's like we're talking about with the IT crowd there. Like, you put Richard Ayoade in it, well, that's Moss, you know, and you put Robert Llewellyn there in the suit. Like, well, Crichton just got on a plane, and came over. He was, he looked great.
Yeah,
he looked very, So I think the costuming on it's quite good. It's everybody looks pretty good on it. Definitely.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I do. I think that's fair. So Rimmer and Lister are next up, and they're walking, and Lister's singing is annoying Rimmer. They encounter the Scutters, who are skiving, and Rimmer punishes them for it. And I did notice that the Scutters had a little more articulation than the British Scutters.
Yeah, they've got eyes as well.
Mm.
That was the. It is sad that one of the greatest jokes that the Scutters have doesn't translate to America.
Flicking the V's.
Flicking the V's. And I do like what they did to cover for it, which is the fist sort of, that one.
Yeah.
Where you sort of slap your fist, but doing it with his jaw. I thought that was quite good. I love the fact that they had eyes. I am a big fan of the Scutters with the Knight Rider on the top that we've got. But they did look like that. Part of me wondered if, like, Rob Grant and Doug Naylor, if they saw them, would be like writing down, like, how does this work? Can we take this back? Sort of. It was like, because ours just run into walls, But they did look like they'd got some proper, like, Robot Wars type people.
Yeah.
Put them together.
Yeah. So, yeah, the Scutters are upset, and Rimmer rushes off to a job after they've discussed his upcoming navigation exam, which is a parallel with a plot line in the British version. Then Lister meets Crichton, who does the joke from the Smeg Ups about his jerky middle name, and Lister's got a slightly different origin to British Lister, in as much as Lister planned from the start to do a number of trips on Red Dwarf, whereas this Lister got drunk.
Yeah, it's a twist on it, isn't it? I think in the novels he wakes up on Io and signs up for the Space Corps because he's got nothing else to do. Whereas on this one, does he say he wakes up on the ship? Or
yeah, he does. It was almost like a press gang kind of plot, which I thought was a little bit sinister, actually, which we never got in the British Red Dwarf. There was no real sinister undertones of, well, fucking slavery, I suppose.
Yeah. I think it's because he mentions where he was to start with that makes it quite odd when he says, I was in Detroit. And that, to me, sounds weird. As much as they mention Liverpool... Well, they don't mention Liverpool that much in the British one.
I'm not sure how much it is referenced, actually.
Yeah, but him saying, like, I was in Detroit and then I was on Saturn's moon. You're like, right. Well, if the ship's going to and from Saturn, you must have got drunk and then wound up on the ship and then gone to Saturn. And it kind of makes it a bit more implausible when he says where he was. He's very... When he's doing it, when he calls the transport for Crichton because Crichton's lost, and he leans against the side, he is proper action hero. I think he's like dead smooth at that point. When he puts his hand up, Dave Lister, it's like,
and you can't really see kind of like jokes about curry stains or jokes about being a space bum working quite as well with this handsome, hunky American jock.
Yeah, there's jokes about him drinking in it, and you kind of go, right, kind of see it, but almost like you need to be fatter. He's sort of, I've got nothing against him being handsome in it. He's very like the smile and everything. He's quite handsome. When you see some of the close-ups when he's got the beard or the stubble, you kind of go, no, he looks all right. It's almost like from a distance you look at him and go, too handsome.
Yeah, and the very brief moments where Craig Charles took his top off, he's just like normal dad bod, average, reasonably normal British guy who's mixed race, incidentally, whereas this guy's white. But it just felt an odd choice. Not that the actor... You've said this. The actor's good, and he does as well as he possibly could do, really. But it's a miscasting, I think.
That's why, for me, they needed to tweak it a bit more. just think Craig Bierko needed to twerk it more.
Maybe.
But they needed to tweak it a bit more in the terms of the dynamic. With Rimmer and Lister in the British one, Lister's, it's the class thing, and, and physically, Lister's shorter than Rimmer. In this one, they almost needed, they've got it all the other way around, in that Rimmer's shorter than Lister, and the class thing's not really there in America, because it's not, I mean, it is in America, but it's never really shown that much in TV.
No, you're right.
And the whole, wanting to be an officer thing, when they've shown, and in this pilot they've already shown Rimmer can't do it.
Yes.
No matter what he tries, he can't do it. Whereas Rimmer in the British one, he kind of gets close. He has moments where he gets close. But in this one, you just categorically think Rimmer cannot get any further. Yeah. He's a complete wreck.
Yeah. So Christine Kochanski turns up and dumps him, which is kind of retconned in a way that I think they wanted to be the plot once they'd already established that he'd only had X amount of words to her in the British one. So I think this is almost what they decided a little bit later on, as they got further into the British series, the relationship that they did want Dave to have with Kochanski.
Yeah, because it's the thing of why would he pine after a girl he hardly ever knew? So yeah, they needed them to be a couple. I mean, I think it's when he gets to 7.
Yes, that's
right.
right.
6 or 7, because he has that hallucination of her in 6, and I think that's where it's kind of teased that they were a relationship, and then 7's where it was officially they were in a relationship because Kochanski's actually there. Yeah, but doing it from the start, I thought best thing for them to do, because it gives him when you see. Not jumping ahead too far, when you see them at the end, she is there.
Yes.
And that gives him something to, go for. But, just from the off, as soon as she walks in and the first words out of her mouth, how are they together?
She's a shithead. Didn't like her at all. She was really, really unlikable.
And my immediate thought was, he's her bit of rough.
Right.
And it was she doesn't really care about him. She just uses him for sex, by the sounds of it. But and she was just
that's more believable with Craig Bierko than it is with Craig Charles. I like Craig Charles though.
I do. Craig Charles you can believe is a romantic lead. Craig Bierko you could believe was a romantic lead, but not in a I'm pining after sort of way. Just more in a look how dashing and sexy he is. Not in a kind of he's chasing the love that he wants to win and get the girl. You look at Craig Bierko and you go, you've got no issue getting a girl.
No, exactly,
and a good
right.
one
exactly
as well.
Right.
It's almost why are you being you're being dumped by this woman who appears to not care about you, but you've only got to look in the mirror and realise that you're probably going to be all right.
Yes.
Yeah. There's other fish in the sea.
Exactly. So the next scene is in Lister's quarters, and Crichton enters and attempts to be sympathetic, and that's actually quite funny because he fails miserably. The captain comes on screen and talks about a unauthorised animal being on board. Turns out that it's Frankenstein, and the cat is still called Frankenstein, and Lister asks Crichton to hide the cat in this version of the origin story.
I liked this. I really enjoyed. They made Crichton more of a. I mean, in the British one, for a good series or so, he does have some good gags, but he is essentially exposition on legs.
Huh.
But in this one, they give him some. He's more of a wacky sidekick at times. He's a bit more emotional.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
When the bit where Kochanski's dumping Lister and Crichton's in the background what do you need to talk to him about? Oh, she's dumping you. And when he asks him to go, he goes, "Okay, so you want to get dumped alone? Fair enough."
Yeah.
I genuinely laughed at that bit.
Yeah, it was very clever. And I think this relationship is established immediately, whereas obviously it takes us 3, maybe 4 seasons for it to really establish in the British version. And I think they established the relationship really, really well, that Crichton clearly wants to be friends with Lister, and Lister kind of likes him, but also he's a bit dorky for him, and it works really nicely, very quickly and very easily, and almost quite naturally as well.
Yeah, he's almost turns into his dorky little brother.
Yes.
Yeah, it's that thing of the little brother who will do anything for the big brother because he looks up to him. So he's like, "Will you hide my cat?" I did laugh my head off when I thought this was a nice little addition. Lister's got a hologram thing on his bed that hides the cat, which I thought was great. And then Crichton goes, "All to stop you from making your bed." He's not noticed the cat at all.
Brilliant.
And I really liked that. I think Robert Llewellyn's got some of the best lines in this.
Yeah, I think so too. I think if I was going to pick anyone as the standout star, again, this could be a bias because I like the British series, but the standout star is Robert Llewellyn. But he had a massive opportunity to hit the ground running because he's played the character for, 18 episodes of the British show?
Yeah, he's done 3 series by this point.
The captain calls Lister to the control room, and on his way there he sees Rimmer on a stretcher, having failed the engineering exam again, and it's the classic "we want the cat" conversation that he has with Captain Hollister in the British version, including some of the same gags, but what it does is it does update it for the technology of the time. Of course, a mining ship like Red Dwarf in the far, far, far future would have security cameras. But in 1988, security cameras and CCTV wasn't quite as prominent, or at least as well known, as it was in 1992. So they update that, and that's how the captain found out that he had got a cat. The captain says, "If you don't tell me, I'll ask Crichton," and he still doesn't tell her. So she asks Crichton and his head explodes. And the eyes in the tea was very funny.
The eyes in the tea were funny. Munson's reaction to it was funny about it being a delicacy in some countries. I thought it was quite an interesting scene for the relationship between Crichton and Lister.
Yeah.
In that when she says to them, Crichton's programming, which I thought was quite nice, that Lister already knows that Crichton can't lie.
Yeah.
And the fact that Crichton does lie, or tries very hard to lie, and Lister can see that it's causing him great stress, and tries to get him to stop, or tries to get them to stop asking him.
Yeah.
I thought that showed sort of true friendship. I do like the fact that, and it's kind of referenced at the beginning when they're talking about the ship as well. Yes, now the ship's got security cameras because it would do, because that's more commonplace. But they also mentioned that the ship's got a bowling alley, like a supermarket, and a full-sized zero-G football stadium.
All of which are plausible, considering the size of Red Dwarf.
Well, that was the thing. In the British one, there was always this toss-up between how many people were actually on the ship, because Lister was crew member 169 and he was the lowest, so there'd be 169 people. But then if you go forward in when Rimmer gets arrested for murder, it's 3,500. They just kept sort of going round and round as to how many people were on the ship and how big the ship actually is. But in this, I quite like the idea of it's a city, you know, and that makes more sense for the cat people and stuff like that as well.
See, I'm not sure it does, because for me, in my head, it was always a small population, because the vast majority of Red Dwarf was storage space for the mining stuff that they'd mined, for the ore. So why do they need a massive crew when essentially they'll have the technology to move all the equipment with minimal crew? But even then, 3,000 on a ship the size of a city isn't a huge amount, I suppose.
No, I mean, if they've got a full-size football stadium, presumably that means they've got 2 teams worth of football players as well.
Yeah.
2 teams of football players and enough people to sit in the stadium. I think it was blatantly setting up for future episodes where they can go, well, we can shoot in a bowling. It's that thing of we've only got one set, but if we go to a bowling alley and stick a sign on it that says Red Dwarf, we can shoot there, and stuff like that. Might be to make it cheaper, but I like the idea of laying out the turf of this is the kind of thing we've actually got on the ship. Because on Red Dwarf, it's supposed to be like 15 miles long or something, and I don't think we've ever fully seen everything that there is on the ship.
Yeah. And so Lister chooses suspended animation, and on the way there, he sees Kachansky, who said she would have done the same, she loves animals, and then she tells him that she loves him, just as he's being frozen. I thought that was a bit much.
Yeah, it was...
There wasn't enough establishment of anything resembling the kind of on-off relationship that would have someone dump you in the morning and then tell you that they love you in the evening. Everyone's been in that relationship, but I don't feel like that relationship was established at all.
No, it'd have been more believable if they were together and fine at the start. He'd cocked up somewhere in the middle that caused her to be angry and storm off. And then this be you're not an idiot, I love you. So they'd kind of gone, rather than just at the start, you're dumped, and then to I love you. If it had done a full circle almost in that one episode of they'd just had a falling out rather than being dumped. The fact he there's a few moments in this where Craig Bierko does the I'm going to look away because it's awkward reaction. And he does it here where he sort of goes, I'll see you in 6 months, and he kind of rotates anti-clockwise away from Kachansky so he doesn't have to look at her. And he does it when they were doing the security camera thing, and Holly says that she's not going to show between 1 and 2 in the morning, where everybody just can't look at each other for a second and they all look around. That was actually that made that funny for me.
Yeah,
everybody's reaction rather than it's a wanking joke. But I liked his reaction. He was spot on. She could have been anybody else.
She just played a douchebag, and it didn't really work.
It felt like, because I looked up a few of the people. She's not really done a huge amount before us. She's the only one who really didn't go on to do much. And it kind of made me feel like maybe she wasn't the first choice. She's not great in this. When she comes back later on, she's not fabulous in it at all. She's just sort of like reading the line.
And Claire Grogan and/or Chloe Annett were both very, very good. And
I always wondered what it would have been like if it had been Claire Grogan all the way through. So, never know, she might come back.
That's for a main episode. Anyway,
sorry.
So, Lister is unfrozen, kind of stomps out of the chamber, calls for Kachansky, and Holly's on the screen telling him to come to the command bridge. And they have a poor man's version of the Everybody's Dead Dave joke, which was just simply not as charming. And similarly, 3 million years in stasis, and Holly says that she's past her warranty.
You'd think you shouldn't be able to balls up the Everybody's Dead joke, but they manage it.
It just wasn't as charming.
No, I like the fact that when he gets frozen, he's finishing the sentence he was saying when he was frozen.
Yep.
I liked that Craig Bierko was like, oh God, let me out, I'll talk. And then when he's unfrozen, he still thinks he's there.
Yeah. And I think that's a fair assessment, actually, of the American pilot, is that they've seen the footage of their own show and their own script and their own storylines, and they have done some things that have changed it in a way that they felt would be an improvement on the original filming. And that is something that we probably should credit the show for, because the Craig Charles wave got the same message across, but this was more emphatic.
I was thinking about it in the sort of where it was like, in the British one, he was like, "I'm not giving up the cat, and it's part of my plan, and everything like that." And then in the American one, when he realizes she loves him, it's like, "Stuff the cat."
Yeah.
It's like, I'll give up the cat. She loves me, and he's missed it. He's about to get frozen.
But I also thought this scene was a very good example of the difference between British and American culture, because a joke in the British version about "I forgot my library book" is now "my trading cards must be worth a lot," and that was a nice change. That was the same gag, but one was for a British market and one was for an American market, and I thought, credit where credit's due, it is an American show, that was the right switch.
Yes, I mean, it's the biggest gag that goes down. I'm guessing there's a live audience. It's the biggest gag that goes down with the live audience.
You see, I don't think that there was a live audience. It came across as too much laughter for not as funny jokes. I think it was canned. I don't know.
Oh, okay.
But I really think it was canned. And I thought that from essentially the first laugh at the very start of the show, I was like, that gag wasn't funny enough for that amount of raucousness.
Yeah. The thing, I think it's a gag that I can see why the British fans hate it, or why they would hate it with it being my baseball cards, because it's not a British phenomenon. But
that's the whole point, isn't it? They Americanised it. It's an American version of a British show. You can't get the ump about that. In fact, I thought that was excellent.
I thought it was a great joke, but I can see why. Say people might go, "Oh, what's that?" But it's not meant for us.
No,
is it? It's like you say, it's an Americanisation. I can't think of another American version of the. I mean, you could do the library book gag, but
Americans don't use libraries as much as British people do. I don't think
no.
they're not as frequent. There aren't as many of them. I don't think.
Yeah, I can see, because that is a phenomenon. I've seen, you see other episodes of sitcoms where they're talking about, "Oh, I've got this antique baseball card and it's worth thousands of pounds," or stuff like that. That is something that's more ingrained into American life than. But yeah, it is a good one. I like how Jane Leeves is during this scene. I like the fact that she's got Norman Lovett's bite to her. In that when he says, "Is everything all right?" No, of course it's not all right.
Well, I don't feel like that was lost when it's changed from Norman Lovett to Hattie Hayridge, though. She had some quite serious bite as well.
I prefer her. This isn't going to be popular. I can imagine me saying this. I prefer Hattie Hayridge to Norman Lovett.
I mean, I don't dislike Hattie Hayridge, but I think I prefer Norman Lovett to Hattie Hayridge.
Yeah, I don't know whether it's because when I first got into it when I was younger, I started at series 3, which would have been her first one as well. But I watched all of the Hattie era before I watched any of the Norman Lovett stuff.
Right.
So she's sort of I've always been a Hattie Hayridge. I'm a Hattie Hayridge guy.
You're a Hattie Hayridge guy.
But I think it works well having Jane Leeves was very good.
She was actually. She was all right. Yeah.
The circuitry one, because she can do the high posh British voice, and then she can do that deep one where she sort of says her circuits are exploding, and then she goes, "Oh, actually, that one was pretty good."
Yeah, that was a gag. That was a good gag. She can't do a Mancunian accent though.
Well, no, she can't.
But that's a Frasier gag. We'll move swiftly on. So Lister picks up a light bee, and they're expecting Kachansky, and they get Rimmer. It's the only surviving hologram unit, and Rimmer is happy everyone's dead, which makes him in charge, and then Holly announces that there's a non-human life form on the ship.
Yes, I liked bits of this purely because I got a bit confused initially when she went pick up that thing that's on the floor. I was like, why is it on the floor? And then I realised that that's probably where it fell when it wiped out Munson.
Yeah.
So it probably wiped everybody out, because Lister has to put something in a slot, which I'm guessing is Rimmer's card. So the bee's working, the card inside is just destroyed. And so Lister's got to put a fresh one in.
Yeah.
I do like the fact I think it's in this one. I think it's in both cuts. When he goes, "It's Rimmer," Holly looks over and goes, "Oh God, it is."
Yeah.
I loved that Holly hates him as well.
Yeah.
And is very open about it. It's just like, "Oh God, it is Rimmer." I really enjoyed that, which I think probably if it had run to series would have probably developed more that kind of sad, pathetic side of Rimmer in that even the computer hates his guts.
Yeah. So, Rimmer and Lister head down to where the non-human life form was found, and on the way they find Crichton, and he has been sat looking at a fire escape sign for 3 million years, and that's a wonderful gag that I've just botched.
It is probably the best gag in the show. It's like, what have you been doing for 3 million years? I've been reading that fire escape sign.
It's wonderful. It's very good.
And you get the feeling like, yeah, that's all he could do, isn't it? It sounds hellish. 3 million years and you can only read 2 words. But I like the fact that, like, obviously Holly's gone senile over 3 million years. Crichton seems to be okay.
Yeah, Crichton's all right.
He's unflappable.
Indeed. For a character that's supposed to be very flappable.
Yeah. In this one, he's a lot more confident.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which we'll get to in a minute when Crichton's leading the way.
Yeah, he insists on going first. Yeah.
Yeah. He's going to squeegee it to within an inch of its life.
Yes. And what I did like was that Holly broadcasted on Crichton's chest plate, which I thought was, again, potentially something they might have done from the very start if they'd had the tech or the budget, but it works really nicely. And then it has this weird-ass cartoon that tells the whole plot of the first series episode that explained the background of the cats in the British version of the show. And, yeah.
I am massively disliked this.
It was unnecessarily truncated. Why didn't they save it? And the animation was shit as well.
Yeah, it was... I kind of went, oh, they're going to do an animation to show it. But then you looked at it and then went, this doesn't fit.
No.
It's sort of... If it's what Holly's broadcasting to show them what's happened, it doesn't seem to look like anything else in the show. It looks like it's been made for a one-off cartoon on its own. And it just looks... it could be... It could be a cartoon from something else that happened to fit in with what they wanted, and they're maybe going to replace it if it got sent to full series.
Yeah, and I think maybe that's fair, because it's cheap as fuck.
Yeah. As it is, it looks like a bad Monty Python cartoon.
Not even that good.
Yeah.
And then they discover the cat, and within the space of less than a minute, 3 of the biggest jokes of Series 1 of British Red Dwarf are done badly, including the catch the string joke, and the that's mine, this is mine, the better look big joke. All of these jokes that are eked out and done with charm over the British version of the show are just throwaway.
I couldn't believe how badly he managed to botch better make myself look big.
It was crazy, wasn't it?
Yeah, we just went, okay, look big. And I looked at it going, is that a take where he was just kind of muttering his lines to himself and practicing? Or because that's what it looked like.
It's like they want to rush everything to do with the cat, and there's no good reason for it.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I watched both edits that are online, and this is where he does do a bit more. But he still does look big wrong. Well, his version of it badly.
Yeah.
The wailing got on my nerves within 10 seconds.
Yep.
The outfit looked great. He looked like he was straight off of Prince's 1992 world tour.
Yes, I'll give you that. He did look good. But then his face was too old, like we said before.
Yeah, it just looked like, it was like, why... why is he older? It's I'd say for the reasons I said earlier, I didn't feel that the cat should have been older. This is my string, and that's mine. That could have been split into two separate scenes where he's got the string
completely rushed,
or he's got the thing. In the other edit, he gets up and he does the Del Boy through the bar.
What?
Where I think they sort of say to him like, "Let's go," and he was like, "Right," and he leans out to make a point and misses the wall.
Wait, the cat doesn't have grace?
Yeah,
for fuck's sake, no.
The cat falls over, and from out of shot, you hear him say, "Meant to do that."
That's not funny.
Which is moderately it's slightly funny the way he does it, but you're looking at, well, that's not the cat.
No, that's cack. The whole point is that he's an evolved cat. Anyway.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. You do get a cat's face. When a cat falls on its arse and doesn't do what if it fails a jump, it will look at you in a kind of I blame you kind of way. So, but no.
That's where I thought it was coming from. I'm surprised they cut it because it wasn't any worse than the rest of what he does.
Fair.
But yeah.
So they get to the control room again, and Holly asks Dave what he wants to do. Dave is angry and has no real clue, and he asks the others to help him decide what to do. But then a future projection appears with Kachansky instead of Rimmer. Apparently something disgusting happened to him, according to the cat. And again, this is all just so fucking rushed.
Yeah, it's when they're all stood there and like, oh, they do get the proper costumes. It's like Lister's got his jacket. The cat looks a bit more like Series 6 cat, where he's a bit more dressed down. And he talks more human than he does it when we see him here.
Yeah.
Obviously, Crichton looks exactly the same. Kachansky's there. But yeah, you're looking at, oh, that's what it's supposed to look like.
Yeah.
Or that's what it's going to look like.
Yeah.
I hated the "you're out golfing" joke.
Yep.
It's like you're out golfing. Like anything else would have been funnier. Literally anything else.
Rubbish.
Yeah, it's.
And it even has the joke that in Future Echoes that Lister makes where he goes, "Come closer, Rimmer, and then disappears. But it does the same joke, but with so much less charm. We've got an important message, and then they disappear. It just didn't work for me.
Yeah, it was. There didn't seem to be any rush to it either. It was like, we've got something really important, we've only got a minute to tell you. And then everybody proceeds to talk quite laboured between each other for what must have felt like more than a minute. I like the fact that Crichton's sort of saying things like, the power drain is massive, we really need to go. At least he's kind of in it.
Yeah.
Almost, but everybody else is just sort of like,
Yeah.
we're here and we're talking. They felt like they were reading off card.
Yeah. Yeah.
On that bit, to be honest. I'll give them credit. They managed to kind of get the swirly thing that they come out of all right. It looked like they had a decent effect on it. Without keep mentioning it, the other edit, it's just a pile of static, like a square,
Right.
and then it just drops and they're there. So it was really basic, like editing effect. And the cat gets a few more lines in it.
Right.
He gets the "is that what I think it is? What do you think it is?" a big swirly thing in the corner of the room.
Which is another recycled joke.
Another recycled joke, but just done so poorly.
Yeah, I'm glad I didn't watch the extended version of it. Sounds even fucking worse.
For some reason, I did prefer the extended one, but the jokes aren't any better.
Right.
I think it helped for plot more than anything else.
So Dave decides that he wants to go home, but it's 3 million years away. They argue about it a bit, but then he tries to set a course and ends up playing fairground music. The way they eventually set a course is when he accidentally leads on the console. The end.
Wasn't as bad as it could have been. Could have been a lot better.
The fairground music gag was funny. The leaning on the console gig thing was... I just felt like... everything was desperately crammed when they could have done plot lines in this for 3 episodes rather than 1.
It was very rushed. I mean, when they've talked about the writing of it, and apparently none of the American writers liked Grant or Naylor because they were asking fundamental questions about plot and what we were going to do, and they were like, no, throw more gags at it, and I think that shows a lot. Apparently they rewrote the script so it was decent. The story goes that they went in because season 5 was like the most stressful one they've ever done. It was the one where they first started doing the directing side of things, which I'm sure we'll come to on the main show.
Yeah.
But basically, they went straight to America, absolutely knackered, and then jet lagged.
Right. It was in that documentary, wasn't it?
Yeah, to find out that their show's been completely turned upside down and inside out, and it's not funny. And they had a big fight on their hands, and then they eventually rewrote the script drunk and gave it to the cast who liked it, but then for some reason, mysteriously, bits of it didn't get filmed. It sounds like the producer just didn't want anybody's input on it unless it was his.
Yeah, it does. There is one last little addendum where Holly has a little diary, but this one is at the end rather than at the start of the next episode, and she points out that they've picked up some broadcasts. There's a shot from the Smeg-Ups as Dave learning how to use Starbug, which hadn't been mentioned at all in the previous set of the whole... In the whole episode, Starbug hadn't been mentioned once. There was stuff about Rimmer trying to make his own body, and then there's footage from Camille where Crichton meets a girl. And it's just awful.
Yeah, I suppose that's the only good bit. Well, that's the good bit about having Robert Llewellyn, is you can reuse shots from the original if it's got Robert Llewellyn in it, because it's the same bloke. But yeah, it's like you said, it's reusing stuff from it. I'm sure that this didn't get broadcast, and I get the feeling that a lot of it was done. I know when we come to talk about the second pilot that was never meant to be seen. That was just for executives only.
Right.
And part of me feels this should have been as well, or
this was never broadcast. At least not at anything other than conventions, and you can see why. It is fundamentally flawed, horribly rushed. There's a lot of wasted plot ideas. It's cheap, but it's not charming, and that's the difference, is that the British version of Red Dwarf was even cheaper, but my goodness, it had charm.
Yeah, you had the almost British spirit of, right, we've got 10 egg boxes and a camera. Let's build a spaceship.
Yeah.
But with the American one, it was almost like, well, we've got the money. And to be honest, the sets were probably the thing I noticed least. It's sort of when you saw the bed. I thought the quarters looked all right.
Yeah,
they kind of copied the thing off the first 3 series of Red Dwarf are grey.
Yeah,
well, the first 2 series of Red Dwarf are grey. And rather than go for like 3, 4, and 5, which are more colourful and this, that, and the other, they kind of went more leaning towards the grey.
Yeah,
it was more. It doesn't matter what the set looks like; just make it look like it's right. And get those gags in there. They said that they had like 20 writers pitching in jokes that they'd roped in from like other offices. And I was interested about this because it was 1992, and they said that they'd got in Simpsons writers, and writing for the Simpsons at the time was Conan O'Brien.
Huh.
And I wondered, when I saw that, I went, there are a couple of jokes that are very Conan-ish that he does sort of now. So I did wonder if he pitched in, because comedians do punch-up all the time for shows, but they're never credited for it. So I did wonder who got roped in to do these things.
Yeah, and the thing is, I've just had a massive rant, but there were things to like. The rewriting of Crichton into the origin story I thought worked excellently.
Yeah.
I felt like There was some fun ideas, like Crichton's chest plate being a broadcast. What it broadcast was shit, but the idea that was good. I felt like the using gags that had worked in the British show and making them new, like changing library to baseball, that was good. But I don't know. It wasn't
Thinking
good.
about it, there's one British gag in the extended one that you'd have really hated.
Go on.
Lister goes into stasis, it cuts to a model of the ship, and a scroll, like a Star Wars scroll, goes up saying 3 million years later. I couldn't believe it when I saw it.
That's daft.
What? It's like one of the biggest jokes of, you're now 3 million years in space, and they just go do 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 do. It scrolls up on like calculator style font.
So, right, you look. I mean, it was 95, so 3 years later when we got the American Doctor Who pilot,
Yes.
And for all its flaws, that was watchable, exciting, and I was disappointed that didn't get a series. Had I seen this at the time, as a fan of Red Dwarf, I would not have been disappointed that didn't get a series.
I'd have probably watched it for a bit out of misplaced loyalty, but yeah, I don't think I'd have enjoyed it. There's too many people in it that I just couldn't give a toss about, character-wise. The only really good ones in it for me was Craig Bierko as Lister and Robert Llewellyn as Crichton. Oh, and Jane Leaves. Those were the three.
Yeah.
And I think that shows when they do the second one that those are the only three who come back.
Do we have to do the second one?
We don't have to if you don't want to, but I think it's better, and it's only about 10 minutes.
Oh, all right, we'll do the second one. Before we go, Carl, was there anything that you were itching to say about the American pilot of Red Dwarf that we haven't already covered on this episode?
No, I think we've covered it all. I mean, it's just a missed opportunity. It could have worked. It really could have worked. I don't know, because this was around the time, like, not long after things like Friends were launching. So whether they'd have taken a science fiction sitcom, because it was going to be on NBC, which I'm pretty sure was what Friends was on.
Right.
So that would have been a strange run-in. Though even when Rob Grant and Doug Naylor are talking about it, they talk about this show as if it had got picked up, it had got cancelled. They never really talk about it to me in terms of like, it was going to run for years and years and years. I think that was something that I don't think they'd have taken into consideration. If they did, they'd have been happy as Larry, but I don't think they thought it would have. I think at the time it wouldn't have worked. If it came about in like the early 2000s, like when Battlestar Galactica and stuff like that was starting to get made,
Yeah.
and they tried to do it then, I think it would have worked.
Maybe.
So I if someone like Sci-Fi would have put their money behind it, because they put their money behind other stuff like that Future Man. Have you seen that?
Yeah, true.
And it wouldn't have been one that they were like, we're going to bet the entire station on this. But I think it's something that they'd have probably done and had enough money to comfortably have kept it going for at least one series.
And an American series would have been massive as well. It'd been like 20 episodes, wouldn't it?
Oh yeah, I mean, if you think about it, like, if it had gone to one series, that would have been more in one American series than had been in the entirety of the British run.
Yeah.
To that point.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know if you could make it 23 episodes a season. You'd have a lot of monsters and a lot of Monster of the Week.
Yeah, and the reality is the original Red Dwarf premise was that they didn't want aliens, and if you look at the bad guys, they're replicants or constructs or waxworks or whatever in Red Dwarf.
Yeah.
They actually don't have any aliens.
They didn't want robots. That's why Crichton's only in one episode of Series 2.
Right.
They kind of went, fine, we'll do a robot, but we're only doing it for one episode. But was so popular that they had to bring him back. And if they were doing that for 23 episodes a season, and let's say they ran for 4 seasons, so nearly 100 episodes, because they always try and push American shows to get past 100 episodes
I know.
to get into syndication. It wouldn't have been. It probably would have been like The Office. It wouldn't have been the same thing halfway through as it was when it started, and it could have been a good thing that was the case. But I just think it was 10 years too early. Definitely. If they'd done it in the lull between series 6 and 7, I could have understood.
Yeah, that would have made more sense as well.
I didn't realise there was such a gap between 6 and 7. It was 4 years.
Yeah, there was.
Yeah.
Big gap.
If they'd done it then, I'd have understood. But at this point, didn't work.
No. So, Carl, where can people find you on the internet?
Well, after my first episode, where I sort of rambled on about, I've got this, I've got that, I've got the other, I got myself an All My Links page, which is just one page with everything I do, all my projects on it. So if you go to allmylinks.com/Mr. Carl, and it's the unabbreviated Mr., you'll see everything I'm involved in on there, including this podcast, which I'm very proud to say I'm part of.
Well, isn't that rather slick? I don't have that. If you're looking for me, it's at MarkAdamsHC. That's on Twitter and Instagram. I do have a number of podcasts on the We Made This Podcast network. Have a look for Life's Milestones and Pull or Pass. They are a celebrant podcast where I talk about life in general, but mainly focusing on naming ceremonies, weddings and funerals. And Pull or Pass is a weekly comic book radio show. So if you're interested in those, it's at Life's Milestones and at Pull or Pass, both of those on Twitter. So that's all we've got time for on the first ever special episode of Shipwrecked and Comatose. So until next time,
Shipwrecked and Comatose, a Red Dwarf podcast, was created and produced by Mark Adams and Kurt North. You can find us on Twitter at Red Dwarf Pod, and we are part of the We Made This Podcast network, which can be found online at wemadethispod.com or on Twitter at We Made This Pod.
Elsewhere on We Made This. The giddy carousel of pop.
So there's just one thing we need to know. Where were you on the 13th of July 1985?
I definitely watched the whole of Live Aid, sat 2 inches away from the telly. My mum and my stepdad and my stepsister coming in and out and trying to prise me away from the telly and not really managing.
I was in Wembley. I took a day off work. They didn't believe I was going. I had to show them the ticket.
Went to a dog show at Malvern. And saw Auntie Sandra and Uncle Jeff.
I was there. Me and a school friend went. My mum and dad drove us down. They had a day in London. We went to the concert.
The Movie Palace.
So, Carl, what is White Heat about for you?
For me, it's about where the gangster genre is at this point in time. And I think one of the interesting things to look at with gangster films is always like, how do they take the temperature of the time that they're made? So I suppose it comes at a very interesting time in terms of like globally, doesn't it? You had the proclamation of the People's Republic of China, you had the Soviet Union testing the atomic bomb, stuff like that, So there's something interesting about this film, which ends with this big explosion at the chemical factory, which comes along at this time of like nuclear tension.
Between the Notes.
I think it's important to remember throughout the 1990s into the early 2000s, there were loads and loads of chill-out albums that were released, like repeatedly. They were all over the place, and my dad always used to collect those. He used to buy them, and Morricone was always on those, which is another sign of how remarkable he was. He could cross over into the mainstream populist sphere, and the score for The Mission was always on those albums, particularly Gabriel's oboe, which is an interesting story. I looked this up. So Jeremy Irons plays the character of Gabriel in the movie, and he performs the oboe. Well, he mimes playing the oboe in the film, and then that's obviously overdubbed with the music.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This Podcast Network.